Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on chumbacasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere. So sign up now at chumbacasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's chumbacasino.com and live the Chumba life.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/kidsandfamily. Just go to Indeed.com/kidsandfamily right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Well, welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. And it's a great honour today to be joined by the journalist and writer Amy Cohen Gilliland. And she's here to talk to us today about a really, really dark chapter in South American history. But one which is, there is so much entwined in it in historical memory, how we remember things, and how states suppress historical memory, and how often really brave people come together and they defy that. So her new book, A Flower Travelled in My Blood, the story of the incredible true story of grandmothers who fought to find a stolen generation of children, is the story of the brave abuelas in Argentina who would not allow an entire generation of children who were stolen, their parents murdered by the military junta in the 1970s and 80s, to remain disappeared. And there is a particularly interesting aspect to this, which of course we'll talk about in a moment, of the disproportionate number of Jewish Argentinian people who were disappeared during that era. So firstly, Hayley, it's a pleasure to have you today, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Nick. I'm really excited to be here.
Okay. And I believe that the book was part of your kind of years in Argentina for The Economist. Is that right?
The idea for the book definitely originates with the time that I spent in Argentina between 2011 and 2015. So I moved to Argentina shortly after graduating college on what was meant to be a one-year research fellowship. And I moved down with a basic idea of what had happened during the dictatorship. But it wasn't until arriving in the country that I learned just how brutal and extreme the dictatorship had been. And that was when I first learned, and was absolutely shocked to learn, that among the thousands of people disappeared by the Argentine military during the dictatorship that you mentioned between 76 and 83 were hundreds of pregnant women. And as you mentioned, their babies, they were separated from their babies, and their babies were gifted oftentimes to military and police families to raise under false identities. And I became completely obsessed with the Abuelas de Plaza de Mayo, this group of grandmothers that banded together at immense risk to themselves to find their stolen grandchildren. For a time, they were also looking for their disappeared children until it became pretty clear that their disappeared children were probably not alive anymore. And so I read as much as I possibly could about the abuelas and found that there was only one book in English that had been published on them, and that was really surprising to me. It was a really good book, but it had been published in 1999, and it was quite academic. And my reading tastes, when it comes to history, tend towards the narrative. So everything, all the history books that I read are very grounded in facts. They're robustly referenced in the endnotes, but I want my history to read like a story.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, and that type of book just didn't exist, disappointingly. But it didn't occur to me at the time to try to write one myself, in part because I was 22 and I had just moved to the country and I didn't yet have that level of hubris, I would say. And so I ended up staying in Argentina for 4 years, as you mentioned, working for The Economist as a foreign correspondent. And during that time, I thought about the abuelas a lot, but what happened was the longer I lived in Argentina, the more I got lulled into the sense that everybody already knew the story of the abuelas de Plaza de Mayo, because in Argentina, as you can imagine, these women are very iconic. Their story is very well known.
Yeah.
And so it really wasn't until leaving Argentina and moving back to the United States that, and actually becoming pregnant myself the first time in 2020, that the story kind of came rushing back to me. And I mentioned it to a couple of friends who had studied history, as I had in college, and they had no idea that this had happened. And at that point, I realized that the book that I'd once wanted to read, that narrative history of the Abuelas, I really wanted to write.
And it sounds like it comes from a deeply personal place for you. Were you through the course of the book able to meet any of the abuelas, the people from the movement?
Yes, so I was very privileged to meet 5 abuelas that were still living at the time that I started the book, and interviewed them. And to do those interviews was a real honor. I also, and I knew this was going to be very important from the beginning, consulted a vast trove of archival material. So one of the most amazing things about the abuelas was their prescience. I think many people, and you probably encounter this in the episodes that you do, but sometimes when people are making history, they don't quite realize that they're making history when they're doing it. And so they don't document their activities very carefully. Maybe they don't take notes about what they're doing. They don't take photographs. The abuelas somehow had the foresight to recognize that they were making history, and they kept incredibly careful records that have been sorted into a massive and extensive archive. And so I spent a lot of time in that archive. And then I was extremely lucky in that during the time that I was reporting this book, Rosa Roisinblit, who's probably the central grandmother figure in the narrative, her personal archive was donated. And so I was able to go to Argentina and sit in her personal archive for a full week, and go through every document in that archive. So it was a real mix of archival work and then original interviews, both with the abuelas and people in their environment.
There is so for the benefits of those who probably aren't versed in the recent history of Argentina, from the sort of the 70s to the 80s, from the kind of the run up to the military dictatorship and its rise and fall, what happened?
Yeah, well, I think you have to go back even a little bit further to fully explain what was happening. So between 1930 and 1976, Argentina experienced 6 military coups. So 6 military coups in 46 years. And that pendulum swing between military government and democratically elected government as you can imagine, created a lot of tumult economically and politically, and also really eroded democratic institutions and paved the way for strong men to step in and kind of pass power back and forth to each other. And amid this chaos, a very, very important Argentine political figure emerged named Juan Perón, who ruled for actually 3 terms. So he was democratically elected in the 40s and served for 2 terms. And he was an extremely polarizing figure. He was a populist, and he had fervent adoration from the working class in Argentina. But he had quite an authoritarian style that didn't sit well with much of Argentina. And he was ultimately ousted by the military in 1955. And then he came back in 1973 for a 3rd term, but was quite old and infirm. And during the period of his 3rd term, Argentina really erupted into political violence. So there's a statistic that a bomb was going off in Argentina every 5 hours, or no, every 3 hours. A political killing was taking place every 5. And there was a lot of violence between leftist revolutionary groups that had sprung up and right-wing death squads that were actually tacitly supported by Perón's government. And then Perón died, and the country really descended into chaos. And that was the environment in which the military presented itself as a solution to the chaos and promised to restore order. That was sort of the pretext in which they took power.
And obviously, before they take power, there is, as you said, there is this kind of paramilitary movement, or these death squads, where the kind of dealing with the left in sort of kind of gloves off manners. And does that translate through to the dictatorship period? Are the death squads that are abducting people basically the same people?
This summer, Instacart is bringing back your favorites from 1999 with prices from 1999. That means 90s prices on juice pouches that ought to be respected, 90s prices on box mac and cheese, and 90s prices on ham, cheese, and cracker lunches. Enjoy all those throwbacks and more at throwback prices, only through Instacart. $4.72 maximum discount per $10 of eligible items. Limit 1 offer per order. Expires September 5th while supplies last. Discount based on CPI comparison.
At Capella University, you can learn at your own pace with our FlexPath learning format. Take 1 or 2 courses at a time and complete as many as you can in a 12-week billing session. With FlexPath, you can finish the bachelor's degree you started in 19 months and under $19,000. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu. Fastest 25% of students. Cost varies by pace, transfer credits, and other factors. Fees apply.
Welcome to It Takes Energy, presented by Energy Transfer, where we talk all things oil and natural gas. Oil and gas drive our economy, ensure our country's security, and open pathways to brighter futures. What do you know about oil and natural gas? You likely associate them with running your car or heating your home. But these 2 natural resources fuel so much more than that. More than 6,000 consumer products that we rely on every day are made using oil and gas. Before you even step out the door in the morning, you've already used more products made possible because of oil and gas than you realize. From the toothpaste you brush your teeth with, the soap you washed your face with, and the sheets you slept on. Not to mention your makeup, contact lenses, clothes, and shoes. Oil and gas are vital parts of all these products and so many more. Look around and you'll see the essential role oil and gas plays in our lives. Our world needs oil and gas, and people rely on us to deliver it. To learn more, visit energytransfer.com.
More or less. So the death squad that was active in Argentina between about 1973 and 1976 was called the AAA. So it was the Argentine Anti-Communist Alliance. And a lot of the people active in that movement were off-duty police and military officers.
Yeah.
And when the coup took place, those activities that were tacitly supported by the Perón government before became government policy.
Yeah.
And it was not only the same people, it was actually the same type of car. So there's a very reviled car in Argentine history, which is a green Ford Falcon.
Right.
And often these Ford Falcons had their license plates pried off. They had no markings that identified them as being related to the government. And these were the cars that much of the AAA drove, and then much of the Argentine armed forces drove during the dictatorship. So there was a lot of overlap.
Yeah. One of the things I find really, really fascinating, perhaps fascinating isn't quite the right word because we're dealing with some serious stuff here. But when you have things like the end of apartheid South Africa, the end of the GDR, the sort of notional transition to some kind of democracy, what people do with the knowledge of what has happened is a really polarizing thing. I've known of acquaintances from Chile who say, no, when we go home, my mum and dad say, if it wasn't for General Pinochet, this country would have been in a right old mess. They think he's a great guy. There are people who, after the Spanish Civil War, in the 60s and 70s, looked upon the international brigades and those that fought for the Republic as the worst people ever. You've dragged all this out. If we just had one strong man, everything would have been fine. And I wonder how you found that in Argentina, people struggling with the legacy of all this really, really horrendous stuff.
Yeah, it's a great question. The epilogue of the book is dedicated to these really meaty, thorny questions. Argentina, for as brutal and awful as the dictatorship period was and is really looked at as a bit of a pioneer in the truth and reconciliation movement.
Right.
So very soon after the dictatorship ended in 1983, I think it was 3 days after democracy had been restored, the new democratic president launched a trial against the members of the junta that had held power during the dictatorship. So 3 days, and then that trial was launched. He also launched a truth commission, an investigation into what had happened during the dictatorship and of the disappearances. So that all happened really quickly.
Yeah.
And then, as you can imagine, there was a lot of pushback from the military that was still very strong. And so, again, pendulum swings are very common in Argentina, but you saw a real swing back and forth between the drive to remember, the drive to document, the drive to investigate, and the drive to forget. So there were presidents that took power after the dictatorship that institutionalized a policy of, in order to move on, the country just needs to put the dictatorship behind us. And, we need to focus on the present and not the past. And, what happened. We can't undo it. We need to move forward. And those tensions are still very live today in Argentina. And currently, we're in a moment where the presidency is occupied by someone who seems to very strongly believe that the country needs to forget in order to move forward, and has in many ways tried to rewrite the history of the dictatorship, is slashing funding in a bid to cut overall government spending, but particularly slashing funding to a lot of human rights organizations involved in this type of documentation and memory work and preserving memory. And so these tensions certainly are historical in Argentina, but they're still very live today.
Sure.
And, I think that is fairly true of the other conflicts that you mentioned as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
When a country has endured this level of trauma, you don't reckon with it right away. It takes a really long time.
I would say that that's true for the most part. In most instances, and this doesn't just happen at an elite level; it happens at a grassroots level of people saying, let's not bring all that up again, because one has to then engage in a sort of low-level cultural civil war about to fight over ownership of the past. And I think that's a really key driver of a lot of this.
At Capella University, you can learn at your own pace with our FlexPath learning format. Take 1 or 2 courses at a time and complete as many as you can in a 12-week billing session. With FlexPath, you can finish the bachelor's degree you started in 19 months and under $19,000. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu. Fastest 25% of students. Cost varies by pace, transfer credits, and other factors. Fees apply.
Welcome to It Takes Energy, presented by Energy Transfer, where we talk all things oil and natural gas. Oil and gas drive our economy, ensure our country's security, and open pathways to brighter futures. When it comes to meeting the world's energy needs, more is better. What we mean is our world needs a wide range of energy sources to meet our increasing needs. Just wind or solar won't get us there, as the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. With our growing population and the increasing use of energy-demanding technologies like AI, reliability is key, and the reliability of natural gas is unmatched by wind and solar. That doesn't mean we all can't work together, but natural gas is vital to ensuring we meet our energy needs. Look around, and you'll see the essential role oil and gas plays in our lives. Our world needs oil and gas, and people rely on us to deliver it. To learn more, visit energytransfer.com.
Right. Yeah. In the epilogue, once again, there are 2 quotes that I mentioned, and I am probably going to butcher them because I don't have them in front of me. But there was a quote by Edna Longley, who's from Northern Ireland, an author from Northern Ireland, who basically said that the best thing Northern Ireland could do to move forward from the Troubles was to build a monument to amnesia and forget where we put it. And then on the other side, there was a Spanish philosopher, George Santayana, who said, those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. I'm definitely getting that quote wrong, but that's the spirit of it. And so I think those 2 opposing tensions, are very present in Argentina and have been for a long time.
Were there any kind of archival challenges in writing the book? Obviously, you're poking around the murky activities of a secretive state. Was it difficult for you to find documentary information?
So as I mentioned, the abuelas themselves kept extremely extensive and robust archives, but the government itself burned or destroyed most of the documentary evidence of what had happened during the dictatorship before handing over power to a democratic government in 1983. That was on order of the dictator in power. He ordered his officers to destroy any documentary evidence that existed. And so there wasn't much at all from the dictatorship itself documenting its own activities to try to piece together what the dictatorship did through archival material. You really had to look outside Argentina. Once again, I think the timing of this project was fortuitous in that America had decided, the United States of America, the U.S., had decided to declassify a giant trove of U.S. government cables and documents. And this process began a long time ago, but President Obama in 2016 intensified that effort. And so I was the beneficiary of a lot of declassified U.S. government documents that that covered this period. But certainly it would have been wonderful to have had Argentine government documents, and those just don't really exist from this era.
And you mentioned one of essentially the subject of the book was a Jewish Argentine disappeared woman whose child was born. She was obviously murdered, and the child was adopted by an Argentine Air Force family. And you can only imagine the traumas that person growing up, and crises of identity, and all these sorts of things that they would have had to have gone through. But you mentioned also in the kind of the info about the book that amongst the disappeared there were a disproportionate number of Jewish people. And firstly, I mean, obviously, I confess my ignorance about not knowing about Jewish life in Argentina, particularly. It's a bit of a niche area, I suppose, if you're here in the UK. But was there quite? I mean, firstly, is there quite a Jewish community in Argentina? And secondly, were they kind of disproportionately involved in sort of activism, or was it more a kind of evidence of sort of state anti-Semitism, that kind of thing?
Yes, I think it's a mixture of everything that you just said. So there is a very robust Jewish population in Argentina. It's one of the largest in the world after the United States and Israel. And that was true at the time as well. But within Argentina during that era, Jews represented around 1% of the population, and yet about 12% of the people that were disappeared in Argentina. So it's a really disproportionate number of Jewish Argentines that were disappeared. I think there is a tradition of activism and social activism within Judaism that certainly played out in Argentina. And so there were many Argentine Jews involved in the leftist revolutionary movement. But beyond that, the dictatorship was permeated by a lot of anti-Semitic rhetoric and imagery. So there were some people who survived the clandestine torture facilities, and they came back and gave their testimony. And that testimony sometimes includes descriptions of swastikas being painted on the walls of police stations and jails, of Hitler speeches playing during torture sessions. And so there was certainly a strong current of anti-Semitism that coursed through the military as well. The military tended to be very conservative Catholic, and sort of influenced by that.
Well, there's in certain sort of iterations of fascism. You see this in Spanish fascism, where ironically in the 1930s there really aren't any Jews in Spain, but there's a fabulous book called The Spanish Holocaust by Paul Preston, and he talks about how the reactionary right in Spain is obsessed with Jewish conspiracies, and in the almost complete absence of Jews in the country. But if you're a real conspiracy thinker, you think, that doesn't really matter, you see, because, you can't be too careful. But I think that kind of, and it's a lot of it is kind of Catholic fascist anti-Semitism, and then kind of inspired by kind of, obviously, this kind of Christian rhetoric and that kind of thing. And obviously, as you mentioned, there is this sort of tradition within Judaism, isn't there, of kind of radical activism. And you find in white apartheid South Africa, very interestingly, a disproportionate number of white Jewish activists who said that, the oppression of black South Africans is just like the oppression that we have faced as well. So it's really interesting kind of radical tradition there. But that 12% is a huge, huge disparity. I suppose the other thing to note as well, and this is a thing that used to be the kind of like the preserve of kind of spy fiction, but it's actually true, is that the number of Nazis that did escape to Argentina and found comfortable homes there, and probably all sorts of friendship in retirement, all sorts of friendships with other kind of deeply unpleasant reactionary forces, I would guess.
Certainly. There were thousands of Nazis that found comfortable home in Argentina. And in fact, that was facilitated by the Argentine government. They were they were connected with fake Argentine passports that gave them new identities where they could, comfortably hide in Argentine suburbs and assume new lives. So that was certainly another factor at play.
Some even signed off by Eva Perón herself, apparently.
I knew about Juan Perón. I didn't know about Eva, but that's certainly something I can look into.
Well, there we must draw to a close. So am I right in thinking the book is coming out in July? Is that correct?
Yes, July 15th, it comes out.
Okay. So what I'll do is is there a link or a kind of a pre-order that we can put in the show notes that people can? Okay.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. So I can send you a couple of links. For the UK, I wonder if Amazon would probably be the easiest. But I know I hate directing. In the United States, I tend to direct people to bookshop.org, which benefits independent bookstores, or
I am certain there is a UK equivalent of that. We're all about independent bookstores here on this podcast. So let's champion those guys, as we always say.
Great, absolutely, that's my preference as well.
Hayley, I wish you all the very best with the book. It sounds like a really, really important book, as there's such a dearth of this story written particularly in the English language. I'm sure far more written in Spanish. So I hope it really, really goes off well, and I'll give it a special mention in July. And it was just such a pleasure to talk to you today. It really was.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And
yeah. I don't do enough about Argentina on this podcast, so perhaps if you've got the time in the future, maybe a chat about it would be great.
Absolutely. Happy to.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much. All the best. Bye-bye.
Nice talking to you.
At Capella University, you can learn at your own pace with our FlexPath learning format. Take 1 or 2 courses at a time and complete as many as you can in a 12-week billing session. With FlexPath, you can finish the bachelor's degree you started in 19 months and under $19,000. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu. Fastest 25% of students. Cost varies by pace, transfer credits, and other factors. Fees apply.
Bubba Wallace here from 2311 Racing. Funny thing about being fast, you end up waiting a lot. First to show up, first in line, then just waiting. Me, I rev up Chumba Casino. With over 200 social casino games, no slow lanes here. Why sit around when you can spin? I'm already racing. Your turn. Play for free at ChumbaCasino.com. Let's Chumba.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.